Here is a question I want you to sit with before we go anywhere. The most successful beauty brand in American history was built by a woman who invented her own name, invented her own childhood, invented her own origins, erased her own divorce from the official record, and wrote a memoir so compelling that it outsold the biography that tried to expose her. The brand she built is worth $17 billion. The products still sell. The name still means something. The empire is still standing. So here's the question. If almost everything she said about herself was constructed, what does it tell us that it worked? That is what today is about. Her name at birth was Josephine Esther Mentzer. She was born in Corona, Queens, New York. Her father ran a hardware store. Her family were Hungarian Jewish immigrants. She told the world she was born in Vienna. She told the world she had grown up surrounded by European elegance. She added an accent mark to her name to make it look French. And she pronounced it the way her father had, in his Hungarian accent, which happened to sound, to an American ear, like the French pronunciation. The rebranding of a person, as deliberate as the rebranding of any product. This is Builder's Codex. And today we are going deep on Estée Lauder. Not the highlight reel, not the memoir she wrote, not the woman she presented to the world. The full story, the myth and the mechanisms behind it. The decisions, the fabrications, the genius, and what happens to a company when the genius is gone. Let's go. Before the stories, here is the 30-second version, so everything that follows makes sense. Josephine Esther Mentzer. Born 1908, Corona, Queens. Father, a hardware store owner. Mother, a Hungarian immigrant. Uncle, a skin chemist named John Codex who set up a makeshift laboratory in the family's home. She married Joseph Lauder, later anglicized to Lauder, in 1930. She divorced him in 1939. She remarried him in 1942. Their son Leonard was born in 1933. Their second son Ronald in 1944. In 1946, she and Joseph founded a cosmetics company. In 1948, she walked into Saks Fifth Avenue and walked out with an order that changed everything. In 1953, she invented a product called Youth Dew that rewired an entire industry's behavior. By the time she handed the company to Leonard in 1995, revenues were over $2 billion a year. She died in 2004 at 97. The company bearing her name today owns brands from MAC to Clinique to La Mer to Jo Malone to Le Labo to Frederic Malle. That is the surface story. What follows is everything underneath it. But before we get to the stories, before we get to the woman herself, we need to understand the world she walked into. Because she did not arrive in an empty field. She arrived in a war, and the people already fighting it were formidable. To understand what Estée built, you first need to understand the industry she walked into. Because she did not invent the prestige beauty market. She inherited it, and then took it. There were three figures who dominated when she arrived, and each one taught her something she could not have learned anywhere else. Helena Rubinstein, born in Krakow, Poland in 1872. Emigrated to Australia at 24 with almost nothing. By 1902, she had a beauty salon in Melbourne. By the 1930s, she was one of the wealthiest self-made women in the world. Salons in London, Paris, New York, a vast art collection, a fortune built entirely from face cream. Rubinstein was the first to articulate the concept of different skin types, oily, dry, combination, sensitive, and build products around them. She hired dermatologists. She positioned cosmetics as science rather than vanity. She referred to her competitors as that woman and the nail man. She refused to speak their names. What Estée learned from Rubinstein: the power of scientific language to justify luxury prices. The importance of personal presence in a brand. The value of positioning cosmetics as expertise rather than indulgence. The second figure was cut from a completely different cloth. Where Rubinstein led with science, the next woman led with elegance. And her story is just as instructive. Elizabeth Arden. Born Florence Nightingale Graham in 1878 on a farm near Toronto. She arrived in New York in 1908 with very little money and talked her way into a partnership with a small Fifth Avenue salon. Within 2 years, she had bought out her partner and renamed it Elizabeth Arden, a name she invented entirely. Arden pioneered the in-person demonstration. She brought European massage techniques to American salons. She was ferociously competitive, deeply personal in her grudges, and entirely unwilling to expand her market beyond a narrow social elite. The rivalry between Rubinstein and Arden was one of the most documented in American business history. Their salons were less than a mile apart on Fifth Avenue, serving the same customers for 40 years. Neither would speak the other's name in public. Staff warfare was constant. Arden stole Rubinstein's star sales director. Rubinstein's response was to hire Arden's ex-husband. What Estée learned from Arden: the in-person demonstration beats advertising. Staff as brand ambassadors. The founder's personal style defines the brand's identity. And then there was the third figure, the one neither Rubinstein nor Arden ever took seriously. The one who was quietly building an empire in the channels they refused to touch. Charles Revson of Revlon. Founded Revlon in 1932 with a $300 investment and one product, nail polish. He turned it into a billion-dollar empire by treating cosmetics like a mass consumer product. He advertised on television before anyone else in beauty. He understood the drugstore customer, the woman who was not going to Saks Fifth Avenue. Revson and Estée despised each other with a specific intensity. He found her affected. She found him vulgar. She studied him carefully anyway. Between these four figures, Rubinstein, Arden, Revson, and Lauder, the modern beauty industry was invented. Rubinstein had scientific authority, but not warmth. Her brand told women what their skin needed, which felt clinical and slightly intimidating, rather than personal. Arden had elegance and technique, but had built it for a narrow social elite and was resistant to expanding access beyond that circle. Neither woman had found a way to make prestige beauty feel simultaneously credible and warm, authoritative and personal, aspirational and accessible. That was the gap. Estée took Rubinstein's science, took Arden's demonstration, and added the one thing neither had: warmth. The gap was not a product. It was a feeling. She filled it. Now we know the world she walked into. Now we can go to the stories. And the first one begins not in a department store, not at a charity luncheon, not at Saks Fifth Avenue, but in a kitchen in Queens with an uncle and a formula. The uncle's kitchen. It is the mid-1920s. A teenager named Josephine Esther Menser is watching a man work in a makeshift laboratory at the back of her family's home in Flushing, Queens. The laboratory belongs to her uncle. His name is John Codex. He trained as a chemist in Hungary. He has set up his company, New Way Laboratories, in what was first the kitchen and later a converted stable behind the family house. He makes skin creams, cold creams, fragrances. Estée does not just watch. She apprentices herself to him. She learns the chemistry, the texture of the compounds, which ingredients do what to which kinds of skin. By the time she is in high school, she is already convincing her friends to try the creams. Codex gives her the formula for his super-rich all-purpose cream. This formula becomes the foundation of the entire Estée Lauder product line. By the documented accounts of his daughter, he is never compensated for the gift, never offered equity in the company that grows from it. In Estée's autobiography, he appears only as a kindly uncle who sparked her interest in beauty. The formula, the actual chemical starting point of the empire, does not appear in the official story at all. This is where the mythology begins. The starting point does not determine the destination. Receiving a formula and building a global luxury brand are completely different acts. The genius was not in the chemistry. It was in everything she did with it across 60 years. What are you building from the raw material you have already received? She had the formula. Now she needed to learn what to do with it. And what came next was not a launch, not a press release, not a breakthrough moment. What came next was 15 years of invisible work that almost nobody has ever written about. The 10-year kitchen. This is the story almost nobody tells about Estée Lauder. Between the uncle's laboratory in the 1920s and the Saks Fifth Avenue counter in 1948 lies a decade and a half of work that nobody outside her immediate family witnessed. She married Joseph in 1930. Within months, she was selling Uncle Scott's creams wherever she could find an audience. Beach clubs on Long Island, hair salons in New York, charity events, dinner parties. Anywhere a woman might be sitting still long enough to listen. A critical moment in this period. She is getting her hair done one day at a salon called the House of Ash Blondes. The owner, Florence Morris, asks Estée about her skin. It is perfect, Morris says. What is she using? Estée returns the next visit with 4 jars. She demonstrates them on every woman in the salon. Morris is so impressed that she invites Estée to sell from a small counter inside the salon. Her first retail arrangement. A counter in a hair salon. Not Saks. Not Bergdorf Goodman. A hair salon in New York City. That was the beginning. Then the marriage broke down. In 1939, a fact she erased from her autobiography entirely, Estée and Joseph divorced. She spent time in Miami Beach. She sold there too. The Florida social circuit. The hotels. The salons. The divorce years were not a pause. They were more practice. She later told a friend that she had thought she had married too young, that she had missed out on life. She found out, she said, that she had the sweetest husband in the world. In 1942, she asked Joseph to take her back. They remarried. After the remarriage, the business became serious. Joseph and Estée rented space in a former restaurant in Manhattan and literally cooked the product batches on the restaurant's old burners. Their son Leonard, by his early teens, was delivering product by bicycle. The family packaged, shipped, and fulfilled orders together. This was not a startup with venture funding. It was a family cooking beauty products on a restaurant stove and delivering them on a bicycle. Phil Knight sold shoes from the back of his car at track meets for years before Nike existed as a brand. Estée sold creams from a bag in hair salons for 15 years before her first department store counter. In both cases, the early obscure period was not preliminary to the real work. It was the real work. The skills that make a visible moment possible are almost always built in private, over time, without an audience. Do not skip the 10-year kitchen. She had the formula. She had 15 years of practice. She had honed a technique through thousands of repetitions in hair salons and hotel lobbies and charity events. Now we need to look at that technique up close, because what she had built was not just a product. It was a method, a specific, almost unervingly effective method for turning a stranger into a customer. The powder room ambush. Before there was a counter at Saks, before there was a company with a name on the door, Estée Lauder sold face cream the same way she would sell it for the rest of her life. One woman at a time. In person. With her hands on your face. She sold at hair salons. She would sit in the waiting area and strike up conversations. She would pull a jar from her bag. She would offer to show you what it could do. She did not ask if you wanted a demonstration. She simply began. Her technique, captured in a 1985 television documentary, was disarming in its directness. She would look at a woman and say, "You are beautiful, but I could make you more beautiful." Not a question, a statement, an invitation that was also, somehow, a compliment. She sold at charity luncheons. She would find out who was attending, arrive early, and position herself where she would meet the women who mattered. The socialites, the society editors, the women whose faces appeared in the columns. She understood something most salespeople of her era did not. The right 20 customers were worth more than 2,000 random ones. If a woman who lunched at the right tables wore your cream, the conversation traveled further than any advertisement. Her motto, which she repeated throughout her life, was telephone, telegraph, tell a woman, free channels. The first two were technology. The third was the only one she actually trusted. What she was actually building in these years was a word-of-mouth network before the concept of word-of-mouth marketing existed. Every woman she personally demonstrated to became a node in a human network. Those women told other women. Those women came looking for the product. She had no advertising budget, no marketing department, no distribution infrastructure. She had a technique, a product that worked, and time. Own your first customers completely, through presence, not campaigns. The difference between a customer you sold to personally and one who found you through a campaign. Only one of them talks about you when you're not in the room. She had the network. She had the technique. She had the product. And she had been building all three for 15 years in the margins of the industry. Now came the moment where all of that preparation had to be converted into legitimacy. One meeting, one store, one shot. The Saks Gambit. In 1948, Estée Lauder wanted to get her products into Saks Fifth Avenue. This was not a modest ambition. Saks was not just a store. It was a declaration of legitimacy. Helena Rubinstein and Elizabeth Arden dominated the prestige counters. If you were on the Saks counter, you were a serious brand. If you were not, you were still a product sold from a bag at a hair salon. The cosmetics buyer at Saks had no interest, no space, no budget for a tiny product line from a woman nobody had heard of. Estée was not going to win that meeting on the merits of a cold pitch. She did not simply call and ask for a meeting. She engineered the conditions for the meeting to go the way she wanted before she ever walked through the door. The mechanism: a charity luncheon at the Waldorf Astoria. She donated 80 lipsticks in attractive metal containers, difficult to find in the aftermath of wartime shortages, as gifts to attendees. Specifically chosen because the women who attended were exactly the kind of women who shopped at Saks. She made sure the products were in their hands before she made her pitch. By the time she approached the Saks buyer, women were already coming into the store asking for Estée Lauder products by name. Put yourself in the room. It is 1948. You have a product you believe in completely. No advertising budget. No retail relationships. No industry connections. The buyer at the most prestigious department store in New York has no reason to take your meeting. Do you call and ask for an appointment? Or do you find a way to make the demand exist before you ever make the ask? Estée chose the second option. Do not pitch. Create the conditions in which a yes is the obvious answer. The most powerful sales meeting is one where the buyer already knows the demand exists. Engineer that reality before you ask for anything. The meeting went exactly as designed. The buyer had already heard customers asking for the product. He placed an initial order worth $800. Estée went home and told Joseph they had done it. Then she stopped celebrating and started worrying. $800 of product. They barely had the inventory. Joseph worked through the night to fill the order. They delivered it. Within 2 days, Saks called back. The products had sold out. They needed more. She was in Saks. But being in Saks was not enough. Now she needed a mechanism, something that would take a woman who had never heard of Estée Lauder and turn her into a woman who would buy Estée Lauder for the rest of her life. What she invented next is so widely copied today that most people assume it always existed. It did not. The gift with purchase. Gift with purchase is so familiar today that it is easy to forget someone invented it. Every cosmetics counter in every department store in the world uses a version of the mechanism Estée Lauder created. Every free gift with your order you have ever received traces back to a decision she made when she had almost no money to spend on advertising. Here is the exact mechanic. You walk to the Estée Lauder counter. You choose a product and pay full price. As a reward, Estée gives you a second product completely free. You did not ask for it, did not pay for it, did not choose it. She chose it for you, specifically because it is something you have not yet tried. The gift is always an Estée Lauder product. Always. Not a sample from another brand. Not a cheap filler. Her own product, full size or close to it. Selected because if you use it at home for 2 weeks, you will come back and buy it at full price. This is the key distinction from buy one get one. In a buy one get one, the customer gets more of what they already chose. In gift with purchase, the customer gets something they did not choose, designed to introduce them to a product they did not know they wanted yet. The goal was not to give value. It was to create the next purchase. Estée described the logic herself with complete clarity. I just knew. Even though I had not yet named the technique, that gift with purchase was very appealing. The idea was to convince a woman to try a product. She would be faithful forever. That is the entire mechanism in 3 sentences. Get the product in her hands. Let it work. Loyalty follows automatically. The fundamental problem in beauty: customers cannot know if a product works until they try it. Advertising creates desire. It cannot create the specific physical knowledge of putting cream on your face and watching what happens over 2 weeks. The gift solved this by removing the financial risk of trial. She was not giving product away. She was buying the most valuable thing in beauty retail. The moment of personal experience that turns a curious browser into a committed customer. When you cannot afford to advertise, make the product do the advertising. Give people the experience before they have fully paid for it. The cost of a genuinely desirable free gift is always lower than the cost of convincing someone through words who could instead be convinced through their own hands. She now had the counter, the gift, the technique. The company was growing, but it was still a skin cream company operating in a relatively small market. What happened next did not just change Estée Lauder. It changed how an entire industry thought about who was allowed to buy what and why. Youth Dew. Before Youth Dew, Estée Lauder was a skin cream company. After Youth Dew, it was a fragrance company, in a different order of magnitude. Understanding why requires understanding the world of fragrance before 1953, which was completely unlike the world we know now. In 1953, Fragrance was a gift. A man bought perfume for a woman on her birthday or anniversary. Women did not purchase fragrance for themselves. This was not merely a social convention. It was encoded into how the products were positioned, priced, packaged, and sold. The great perfume houses of the era, Chanel, Dior, Guerlain, sold through specialty shops at significant prices. You went to a perfume counter the way you went to a jeweler. You did not browse and buy. You received, or you saved up for something very special. The industry assumed this behavior was fixed. Estée disagreed. She later told an interviewer exactly how she thought about it. Back then, a woman waited for her husband to give her perfume on her birthday or anniversary. No woman purchased fragrance for herself. So I decided I would not call my new launch perfume. I'd call it Youth Dew. She borrowed the name from one of her skin creams, a bath oil that doubled as a skin perfume. A woman could buy a bath oil for herself without feeling guilty or giving hints to her husband. Read that carefully. She did not make a better perfume. She changed the category the product lived in. A bath oil was something a woman bought for herself, from household budget, for daily use. It was practical. It ran out and needed replacing. By giving the product the form of a bath oil and the scent of an extraordinary perfume, she moved fragrance from the receive as a gift category into the buy for yourself category, without asking women to change what they believed about perfume at all. The product itself was intensely scented, a rich blend of rose, jasmine, cloves, amber, patchouli, and vetiver. When women used it in their bath and walked into their day, the fragrance announced them from across the room. It lasted for hours. This was not accidental. A bath oil that vanished within an hour would not have been remarkable. The longevity was the mechanism. Women received compliments. They were asked what they were wearing. They came back for more. Within 2 years, Youth Dew was generating more revenue than the entire rest of the Estée Lauder product line combined. The constraint on growth was not the product. It was the behavior surrounding it. Women wanted to smell beautiful every day. The barrier was a social convention about who was allowed to purchase fragrance. Estée did not fight the convention. She walked around it. When a market is constrained by behavior rather than desire, the opportunity is not to improve the product. It is to reframe who buys it, why, and under what circumstances. Find the behavior that is blocking the desire, and remove it. Youth Dew had proved she could change consumer behavior. But the next move was something different entirely. Not changing what people did, but changing what people believed a product was worth. This one required nerve. The kind of nerve that makes everyone in the room uncomfortable except the person with the idea. The Re-Nutriv Gamble. In 1956, Estée Lauder introduced a cream called Re-Nutriv and priced it at $115. The average American household income in 1956 was around $4,000 a year. A $115 face cream was not expensive. It was almost beyond comprehension. Her competitors laughed. Her advisors warned her. Joseph was concerned. The industry consensus was that she had misjudged her market completely. Estée's position was unshakable. She placed a full-page advertisement in Harper's Bazaar with a headline that has become one of the most famous lines in luxury marketing history. What makes a cream worth $115? Read that headline again. It does not claim the cream is worth $115. It asks the question. It invites the reader into the logic. It implies there is a serious, considered answer, and that the answer is inside the jar. Put yourself in the room. Your advisors are telling you the price is insane. Your competitors are already preparing to mock you. Your husband is worried about the inventory you have committed to producing. Every rational signal in the room says, lower the price. The only voice saying otherwise is yours. Do you hold, or do you fold? She held the price. Re-Nutriv sold. Women who had never heard of Estée Lauder bought it specifically because of the price. The price was the message. $115 said, this is not ordinary. This is not the cream at the drugstore. This is the cream for a woman who takes her skin seriously, who understands that the best things cost more, who is not embarrassed to invest in herself. Most businesses set a price and then try to justify it. Estée did the opposite. She set a price so surprising that customers could not ignore it. And that shock created the question her advertisement then answered. A $25 cream generates no questions. A $115 cream makes you stop, read, and wonder. The price was the opening of the conversation, not the conclusion of it. In luxury, Price is not the last decision. It is the first message. Set it high enough to create the question. Then answer the question compellingly. The price creates engagement. The story converts it. A high price without a compelling answer is just expensive. A high price with a compelling answer is a brand. Quick pause here before we go further. By the way, if you are finding value in this, I've put together the full written breakdown of everything we're covering today. All 12 stories, all the lessons, the operating rules, the full picture of what kind of woman she actually was. Deeper than what we have time for here. Link is below. Less than the price of a coffee. Everything we're covering today, and more, in one document you can keep. Back to the story. We have covered 7 mechanisms. But there is one that underpins all the others. The physical space where every sale actually happened, and the philosophy behind why Estée built it the way she did. This one is hiding in plain sight. The counter is theater. Estée Lauder famously said she never advertised. This was, to put it charitably, a flexible relationship with the truth. What she actually meant was something more specific and more interesting. She did not make conventional print or broadcast advertising the center of her marketing strategy during the critical years of growth. Instead, she invested in the counter. Elizabeth Arden had already pioneered the in-salon demonstration. But Arden's model involved the customer sitting at a treatment station, somewhat formally, in a therapeutic context. Estée brought the demonstration out from behind the glass and into the open counter space of the department store, where any passing woman could be drawn into the experience. More importantly, she touched. This sounds simple. It was not. In the 1950s, the standard cosmetics counter operated across a glass barrier. The salesperson showed you products, described them, sold them across the glass. Physical contact with a customer's face was not standard practice in department store retail. Estée believed the glass was the enemy of the sale. The moment she put her hands on a woman's face, professionally, purposefully, with obvious skill, the relationship changed. The woman was no longer a customer being sold to. She was a person being attended to. The difference is everything in luxury. The beauty advisors behind the counter were hired, trained, and paid by Estée Lauder, not by the store. This distinction was critical. A store employee selling Estée Lauder alongside a dozen other brands has divided loyalty. An Estée Lauder beauty advisor has one job, one brand, one set of techniques, trained personally by Estée herself wherever possible. When she opened a new counter, she would arrive days in advance to train the advisors herself. She would not leave until she was satisfied that every woman behind that counter could do what she did. The proximity principle. A national television advertisement reaches people sitting at home, doing something else, with no intention to buy. The message has to travel a long distance through time and attention before it produces a sale. The counter operates at zero distance. The woman is already in the store. She has stopped walking. She is curious. The sale is possible right now. Think of it this way. Same budget. A television ad seen by 1 million people who just ate dinner, or a sign 500 meters from a restaurant aimed at people who are hungry and driving. The sign converts more efficiently. Every time. Spend your first marketing dollar owning the moment when someone is already in front of your product. Own that moment completely before you reach for anything else. Now we need to stop and look at something uncomfortable. Because everything we have covered so far, the technique, the gift, the counter, the pricing, tells you how she built it. What comes next tells you something about who she erased in the process of building it. The man she erased. Estée Lauder's autobiography is a remarkable document in many respects. Perhaps its most remarkable quality is what it leaves out. Joseph Lauder, her husband, her business partner, the man who ran the operational and financial architecture of the company for 30 years, is present in the book. But barely. He is supportive. He is encouraging. He works hard in a general, unspecified way. Leonard Lauder's 2020 memoir corrects this quietly and firmly. Leonard grew up in the business. He watched both his parents work every day from childhood. His account of his father is not the account of a supportive husband standing behind a brilliant wife. It is the account of an essential business partner, responsible for financial management, supplier relationships, manufacturing operations, quality control, the entire legal and administrative infrastructure of a growing company. Leonard put it plainly. The company that bore his mother's name was built by 2 people. And there is the matter of the divorce, which, as we noted earlier, does not exist in Estée's autobiography. She presents their marriage as a single continuous arc from the 1930 wedding to their golden years together. Unbroken and uncomplicated. Lee Israel, working from public records, documented the divorce in her 1985 biography. Estée denied it. The public record is unambiguous. The erasure of Joseph is not a small biographical error. It is the foundation of the solo genius myth. If the company was built by Estée and Joseph together, which the evidence strongly suggests, then the story of the self-made woman who built everything through talent and determination requires revision. That revision does not diminish Estée. Her contributions were extraordinary, but it complicates the mythology, which is precisely why the mythology required Joseph's invisibility. The partnership behind a great company is almost always more complex than the public story allows. The myth of the solo founder is almost always a simplification, and almost always one that the most visible founder has an active interest in maintaining. Now we move forward in time. The company is established. The brand is working, and it is Leonard, not Estée, who makes the next great strategic leap. A decision that most companies never make, because it requires them to do something that feels almost suicidal: build their own competition. The Clinique Decision. In August 1967, a Vogue magazine article changed the trajectory of the Estée Lauder company. The article was titled, "Can Great Skin Be Created?" Written by a Vogue beauty editor named Carol Phillips, it featured a New York dermatologist named Dr. Norman Orentschake, who was pioneering a three-step skincare regimen: cleanse, exfoliate, moisturize, customized to an individual's skin type, twice daily. The article argued that great skin was not genetic luck. It was achievable, systematically, by anyone. Leonard Lauder read it and moved quickly. He was already thinking about what the company needed to do next. The Estée Lauder brand was successful, but it was reaching one kind of woman. The woman who wanted glamour, luxury, a certain kind of feminine authority. A generation of younger women was emerging who wanted something different. Science, health, clinical language, products that told them the truth about ingredients rather than selling aspiration. The Estée Lauder brand could not serve this woman without compromising what it stood for. You cannot be both luxurious glamour and clinical skincare system at the same time. The positioning would collapse. Leonard's insight was that the company should create the brand that would otherwise compete with them, and create it before anyone else did. He enlisted both Carol Phillips and Dr. Orentschake. The name came from an unexpected source. Evelyn Lauder, Leonard's wife, had been in Paris and noticed signs across the city for Clinique Esthétiques, the French term for beauty clinics. She loved the word immediately. Clinique launched in September 1968 at Saks Fifth Avenue, the same store where Estée had placed her first counter 20 years earlier, with an astonishing 117 products. Everything about it communicated, this is not Estée Lauder. Pale celadone green packaging. White lab coats on the beauty advisors. The tagline, twice a day, meaning skincare should be as automatic and non-negotiable as brushing your teeth. No glamour. No aspiration. Just skin health, pursued systematically. The article appeared in August 1967. Clinique launched September 1968. 12 months from signal to product. Leonard did not wait for a consulting report. He read a magazine article, recognized the implications within hours, and had the company moving within weeks. The trend he spotted, scientifically literate consumers wanting clinical honesty rather than aspirational mythology, is now the defining trend of the beauty industry. He saw it in 1967 from a single Vogue article. Compete with yourself before someone else does. When you see a customer segment your existing brand cannot serve without compromising what it means, build the brand that serves them. The cost of a new brand is always lower than the cost of losing a category to a competitor permanently. The company was now a multi-brand empire. The name Estée Lauder meant something powerful, which meant it was also a target. And in 1983, someone came for it, armed with public records, a publishing contract, and a mandate to tell the whole story. What Estée did next is one of the most instructive things she ever did. The woman who tried to expose her. In 1983, a publisher called Macmillan approached a journalist named Lee Israel with a proposal. Israel had written 2 successful celebrity biographies. Macmillan wanted an unauthorized biography of Estée Lauder. Warts and all, they said. Israel accepted the advance. What followed was, from Estée's perspective, a serious threat. Israel began interviewing industry insiders, beauty editors, competitors, former employees, working without the family's cooperation, using public records and the accounts of people who had been around Estée Lauder for decades. She was documenting the fabrications, the queen's origins presented as Viennese aristocracy, the concealed Jewish identity, the divorce that did not appear in the official story, the uncle who had not been credited or compensated. Estée's first response was to try to stop the book. The Lauder family offered Israel a six-figure sum to abandon the project. Israel refused. Estée's second response was more brilliant and more devastating. When she learned that Macmillan planned to publish Israel's book in the autumn of 1985, she decided to write her own autobiography and have it published at exactly the same time. Her publisher timed the release to land simultaneously with Israel's biography, so that the two books would compete directly on shelves. The result was not even close. Estée's autobiography was warmly received and widely bought. Israel's biography was panned by critics, found to contain fewer revelations than advertised, and sold poorly. Israel's career entered a downward spiral that eventually led to the literary forgery crimes for which she is now best remembered. She forged over 400 letters from deceased writers. She was caught by the FBI and served time under house arrest. The woman who spent 2 years documenting Estée's fabrications became a far more prolific fabricator herself. Estée, who never met a narrative she could not shape, would probably have found this grimly satisfying. When confronted with a threat she could not legally stop, Estée did not try to suppress it. She out-narrated it. She understood that in the arena of public perception, the most powerful counter to someone else's story is your own story, told better and delivered louder. A well-told truth always outperforms an accusation, even when the accusation contains some truth of its own. Tell your story better, louder, and first. Which brings us to the story that sits underneath all the others. We have talked about the products, the mechanisms, the counter, the pricing, the partnerships. But there is one thing she built before any of it, and it may be the most important thing she ever constructed. Not a cream, not a counter, not a company, a person. The woman she invented. Josephine Esther Mentzer, the daughter of Hungarian Jewish immigrants who grew up above a hardware store in Corona, Queens, became Estée Lauder, a name with a French accent mark over the first E, suggesting continental elegance she had no biographical connection to. She told interviewers she was born in Vienna. She added the accent mark to make the name look French, and she pronounced it the way her father had, in his Hungarian accent, which happened to sound, to an American ear, like the French pronunciation. The rebranding of a person was as deliberate as the rebranding of any product. This was not simply social climbing. It was brand architecture. Estée understood, decades before the concept existed in marketing literature, that a luxury brand is inseparable from the story of the person behind it. She was not lying to protect herself from embarrassment. She was constructing the persona that the brand required. The woman who sold the cream had to be credible inside the world the cream was selling entry to. The concealment of her Jewish identity is the most uncomfortable dimension of this. She practiced her faith privately. In the social world she was navigating, the country clubs of Palm Beach, the drawing rooms of European aristocracy, the lunches of New York society, being visibly Jewish would have closed doors. She made the calculation that the access was worth the cost. She was not alone in this calculation among Jewish business figures of her era, but she pursued it more completely than most. What Estée built before she built a product was a persona. The persona was not a costume she wore to work and took off at home. It was how she moved through the world. In luxury, this is necessary. In any business where the founder is visible, which in 2026 means almost every business, it is an enormous advantage. Rihanna's Fenty Beauty, Selena Gomez's Rare Beauty, Hailey Bieber's Rhode. Every one of them is applying the lesson Estée applied in 1930. Construct a persona that serves your mission. Be consistent. Be present. Be the product. Build the persona with the same care you build the formula. That is the story of how the empire was built. 12 stories, 60 years, one woman, and the mechanisms she invented and the myths she constructed along the way. But we are not done. Because what happened after she was gone is, in some ways, the most instructive part of the whole story. The woman who built one of the most successful companies in American history is now losing. And the reason why is almost unbearably ironic. In 2022, Estée Lauder companies reached peak revenue of approximately $17.7 billion. Then it stopped growing. Revenue declined each year from 2022 to 2025, reaching $14.3 billion, a decline of nearly 20% from peak, and a full-year loss of $785 million. To understand why, you need to understand one specific behavior that Yelsey had built much of its recent growth on. China taxes luxury goods heavily at home, sometimes 40 to 60% above international retail prices. To avoid that premium, Chinese consumers developed a habit of buying luxury products while traveling abroad, in airport duty-free shops and international travel retail zones, where the goods were significantly cheaper. Yelsey had leaned into this behavior aggressively, building enormous dependence on Chinese tourists spending in airports across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. When COVID stopped international travel in 2020, that revenue evaporated overnight. And crucially, when travel resumed, Chinese consumer behavior had changed. The appetite for luxury spending had cooled. The bounce-back Yelsey expected never fully arrived. Added to this, structural decline in the department store channel that still accounted for a third of sales, and an inability to reach younger consumers who had moved to brands and platforms that Yelsey did not control. One analyst captured the situation in a line that will stay with you. Estée Lauder Companies is losing the mom and not getting the daughter. The company succeeded so completely at the strategies Estée built that it became institutionally committed to them, long after the world had moved on. Leonard opposed selling on Amazon as late as 2023 on the grounds that it would damage the prestige positioning. His mother had thought the same way about mass-market distribution in the 1950s. He was applying her logic. He had confused the principle. Own the channel that reaches your customer. With the tactic, that channel is the department store. The principles that built a great company are permanent. The tactics that express those principles are not. The failure of legacy companies is almost never that their principles were wrong. It is that they confused the principle with the tactic and kept the tactic long after the principle required a different expression. The principle: own the channel closest to your customer. The tactic: that channel is the department store counter. The principle is permanent. The tactic is not. Which of your tactics have you mistaken for principles? Here is what makes this particularly sharp. While Yelsey was confusing principle and tactic, other builders were applying Estée's actual principles in the channels she never lived to see. And they are winning. The brands winning beauty in 2026 are doing exactly what Estée did in 1948 in the channels that exist now. Rare Beauty, $2.7 billion valuation, built its customer base through authentic storytelling on social media and a mission around mental health. Rhode grew searches 232% year-over-year by building a loyal community around one hero product. Charlotte Tilbury performs 640 times above the industry benchmark on social impact. The mechanism is identical to Estée's. The medium is entirely different. The successor to the counter is the TikTok tutorial, the Instagram Reel, the YouTube Short, any short-form video that puts the product on someone's face and lets you watch what happens. The successor to word of mouth is the comment section, the product review on Sephora or Amazon, the Reddit skincare thread where 1,000 women compare notes on what actually works. Estée built trust one demonstration at a time. The platforms have changed. The trust-building mechanism is identical. So let's take it one step further. Not just what are others doing, but what would she specifically do, given everything we know about how she thought and what she valued? What would Estée do in 2026? She would own the counter that exists today. TikTok is that counter. A well-made tutorial does what the counter saleswoman did, demonstrates, educates, creates desire in the specific physical way that a magazine advertisement never could. She would have invested in creators the way she invested in counter training. She would have made gift with purchase digital. Give something genuinely valuable before asking for anything. A skincare routine guide. A tutorial that actually works. An honest answer to a question the customer has been asking on forums for years. The knowledge would be the gift. The trust it built would be the mechanism. She would have gone direct immediately. In 2026, the infrastructure exists to own the customer relationship directly. Estée, who knew the skin of every woman she had ever demonstrated on, would have gone direct from day one and collected the information she needed to make every customer feel seen personally. And she would have made the founder the brand again. She would not have been a distant executive approving campaigns from a boardroom. She would have been on camera, at the counter, demonstrating on someone's face. Exactly as she had done in 1944, except now the room holds 30 million people instead of 30. Before we close, and I want to take a moment with this, because I think it matters, I want to give you the full picture of who this woman actually was. Not the highlight reel, not the mythology, both things at once. I want to end on something that most episodes about Estée Lauder don't spend much time on, because I think the full picture matters, and I think you deserve the full picture. She received a formula from an uncle who was never compensated. She erased her husband's contributions from the official story. She concealed a divorce. She constructed a persona with a fictional biography. She made choices that benefited her at significant cost to people who helped build what she built. She also created something extraordinary from almost nothing, through a combination of talent, obsession, psychological insight, and sheer relentless will. She gave hundreds of millions of dollars to charitable causes. She made women around the world feel more beautiful for nearly 80 years. She was the only woman on Time magazine's 1998 list of the 20 most influential business geniuses of the 20th century. Both things are true. Neither cancels the other out. The most instructive founder stories are almost never the simple ones. Estée built her most important asset, the personal touch, before she had a counter to stand behind. She engineered demand before she made the ask. She reframed behavior rather than just improving the product. She competed with herself before a competitor could. She built the persona with the same rigor she built the formula. She told her story louder and better than the person trying to take it from her. Of all of those things, which one are you not doing right now? You don't have to answer it to me, but I think it's worth sitting with. Everything we covered today, all 12 stories, the operating rules, the psychology, the full picture of what kind of woman she actually was, it's all in the written notes. Deeper than what we had time for here. The Clinique origin story in full. The Lee Israel episode in detail. The 12 operating rules she never named but applied every day for 60 years. You can grab it at the link below for less than the price of a coffee. If this episode was worth an hour of your time, the notes are worth $2. If you want to go deeper on this story, Estée, a success story, is the primary source for the mythology as she constructed it. Read it knowing what you now know about the fabrications, and it becomes a masterclass in narrative construction. The Company I Keep by Leonard Lauder is the most valuable corrective document in the archive. He writes about his father with a directness and generosity his mother's autobiography never extends to Joseph. And if David Senra's Founders podcast episodes on Estée, numbers 136, 217, and 361, are in your feed, they are worth your time. This episode is the complement to those three, not the replacement for them. If this episode gave you something useful, if there was a moment in this story that landed differently than you expected, or a question that stayed with you, share it with one person who is building something. That is how this kind of work travels, not through algorithms. Through one person thinking, someone I know needs to hear this. I am going to keep going deep on the founders, the builders, the people who made decisions that changed industries and changed the world. There are more stories like this one, and some of them are even stranger. Subscribe so you don't miss them, and I'll see you in the next one.